I was just like scrolling through Facebook Marketplace, and came across this like vintage MIJ kit, made in Japan kit. So like, if you're not aware, a lot of Japanese companies like Pearl or Intama and Yamaha, they would utilize some of their surplus like factory time to make like private label kits, kind of like way private label works with retail industry now, and as well as like sell tooling to other factories. And so they made these like cheap kits and sold them here in the U.S. market. And the ones that survived, like people really like having them because they get that kind of really dead vintage kind of sound. So I came across one for $95, and I was like, well, I can't say no to that. I got to grab it. So that plus like $70 in parts that I had to order online, and I'll have it up and running by the end of the week. So
That's awesome.
all in for a couple $100 to have a vintage kit in my arsenal. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Taylor, how was Furnace Fest? Y'all just got back from that.
Furnace Fest. So it was a good festival. I made a mistake that I think I'll never make again. I left straight from work. I worked a half day and I drove down from Nashville to Birmingham, which is like 3 hours. And I decided to stop to grab lunch at Buc-ee's, the giant gas station. And it was definitely against my better judgment, but I went for a pork sandwich and got food poisoning. I think I've narrowed it down to that pork sandwich. And I was sick as a dog the next day, and it took me until about 2 p.m. before I felt like I could leave and go to see any shows. So I managed to like get a second wind and catch some shows on Saturday, but it could have been more fun.
That was a questionable decision. Pork sandwich at Buc-ee's. I mean, not slandering Buc-ee's here, but a pork sandwich to go, that is a debatable
Yeah, that's what I choose to
decision.
That's the weird thing that's happened in American culture the past few years is people aren't afraid to eat gas station food again. Like, when did we just decide as a culture that like, yeah, I'm gonna trust gas station food?
Yeah, we've gotten soft.
Yeah.
One might say it's just a part of our identity, right?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, that's a good segue into the novel there, Will.
Yeah, let's get to the book, guys. This is going to be a great one to talk about.
Sorry, guys. We intended this to be a little bit more of a high-tech stinger here to give you extra context on Kurt Vonnegut and the novel Mother Night. But we had an uploading issue and some things got mixed up a little bit. And so I've had to pop in here to do this quick little intro. And you'll also see me again at the end of the episode to talk about the next book that we're going to be reading. So here's a little bit more about Kurt Vonnegut. So Kurt Vonnegut was born in Indianapolis, Indiana in 1922. He briefly attended Cornell University, but later withdrew to enlist in the U.S. Army. He was captured by the Germans at the Battle of the Bulge, and as a POW, he witnessed the firebombing of Dresden from an underground meat locker of a slaughterhouse. After the war, he attended the University of Chicago and worked as a night reporter before publishing his first novel, Player Piano, in 1952. He later had his commercial breakthrough in 1969 with his sixth novel, Slaughterhouse-Five, which was inspired directly by his experiences in the war. Mother Night, the novel that we're reading together, was Vonnegut's third novel, and he published it in 1961. It follows the story of Howard W. Campbell Jr., an American-born German playwright turned American spy, posing as a Nazi propagandist during World War II. Mother Night is written as a memoir from Campbell's point of view, as The Confessions of Howard W. Campbell Jr., and it takes us through his recruitment as a spy, his attempts to blend in with Nazi high command, his escape from the Allied forces, and his life on the run in New York City as a former double agent whose own country can never claim. The title of the novel comes from Goethe's Faust, in which the demon or the devil, Mephistopheles, refers to the primordial darkness in the universe before the creation of light as Mother Night. Vonnegut said of Mother Night, "This is the only story of mine whose moral I know. I don't think it's a marvelous moral. I simply happen to know what it is. We are what we pretend to be, so we must be careful about what we pretend to be." Vonnegut rated Mother Night an A.
In the editor's note where he talks about, this is his, retelling of a story, and multiple characters throughout this story are actors. Howard Campbell Jr. is a playwright telling stories multiple times. You know, so much of this, these are all reflections of that sentiment, throughout the whole story, because people are always putting on a show to a degree. What is truth? What is real? What is identity? So I know y'all have read this a couple of times. I've read this once. Did it change at all in these second times you read this? Like, did you feel like you had a better understanding of that going in, or was it still some of that morally ambiguous tone that I think he drives throughout this entire novel?
No, I read it now, I think this was my third or fourth time through it. And I kind of read it with that in mind, that opening line. And it's a lot more clear upon rereads, like how that theme just is shot through this entire novel. From the opening pages, like characters that we're introduced to in the Israeli prison, the prison guards, all these people they all tell these short little stories of themselves having to pretend to be people other than themselves, sometimes in order to survive.
Are you talking about the guard that he was like in the SS and was known for being brutal, and he was known among the SS as like being highly successful at like rooting out spies, but he was the actual spy, the double agent, and then he would just get other SS officers executed.
Yeah,
because he was pretending. That's great.
Yeah, and he and Campbell meets him in the Israeli jail. He's one of the guards and is telling him, "Yeah, I had to hide my Jewish identity from the Nazis, and so I just became a great SS officer, and then I got a bunch of them killed." Which there was another guy in there that mentions that he was playing dead at one point during the war, and to such an extent that like the Germans were coming around checking the bodies for like valuables and stuff, and they pulled his gold teeth, and he still managed to remain, convincingly dead. So right from the opening, we have all these examples of like some of the reasons that we might want to pretend to be other people. There's a little bit of gradation there with like, sometimes you have to pretend to be something so that you can survive a situation. And this is like, it already starts this kind of moral quandary that we have to deal with our main character. It's like, at what point is it justified that he, was a double agent? Like all the evil things that he had to do, how much good does one have to create from all the bad in order for it to be justified? That's kind of part of the central thrust of it. What did you think about that, Jensen?
Got me thinking about his motivation, because like he gets approached by his blue fairy godmother, and he's offered this. I was about to say opportunity, but I don't know if that's the best word for it. But this guy asks him to be a double agent. He's not forcing him to. He can, decide to try to stay in Berlin and survive the war, or he can flee to the U.S. But he ends up deciding to do it, and part of that motivation is not some great moral duty, but like he's a playwright, and this is the greatest challenge and the biggest hope for any playwright is to write the most convincing role and then be able to play it yourself.
Yeah, and I think he actually says himself that part of the reason that he accepted it was because he's a ham.
Yeah.
And like he couldn't resist the opportunity to like pretend, a little bit. And, it gets a little bit more morally complex from there, but I do think that that's like a funny part of his character motivation there. For sure. Initially.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I mean, what I love about this book too is it is such a gripping and straightforward novel. A lot of Kurt Vonnegut's writings are very sci-fi. Think about Cat's Cradle as a great example, where there's just a lot to kind of follow. And this one just is so based in a sense of realism. You could kind of put yourself at that place of, with him as he's hearing from Frank, with Howard as he's sitting on the park bench hearing from Frank. But it does, immediately starts to unravel. The question that I was starting to try to get was, yes, he's putting on a performance of some degree, but like when all your actions are in public seem to be innately evil, like, can you be doing good? That's where it's like, you're performing and you're saying all these things while they are, can you be a good man who did, bad things for good reasons? But are you still a good man at the end of the day? I think that's the moral of this story that we're trying to uncover. So I love that he kind of, like you mentioned, Taylor called himself a ham, where he's like doesn't even believe that he can do it, and so he's like, sure, like, we'll make it happen. But it's just like so powerful, just that initial scene. I love it.
Yeah, it's that moral question that you're asking. There's something to be said of the argument that that really plays into that moral of you are what you pretend to be, and it's really exemplified with his conversation with his father-in-law. Whenever his father-in-law says, "I used to think that you were a spy, but now I don't care because of what you've said. You've made me more of a Nazi by listening to you, and there's no way you could have helped them as much as you've helped us."
Yeah, no, exactly. I think Vonnegut puts in lines like that to just drive the point home further that, like, in order for him to be an effective spy, he had to be, like, the utmost Nazi, like a very effective Nazi. And so, for those of us that are, following along and haven't read yet, there will be spoilers, but some people may still just want to listen to the conversation and maybe read the book later. But he is meant to encode secret messages in his radio broadcasts, and so he's almost like he's got like a radio talk show, essentially, and reads off conspiracy theories that he makes up. Essentially, we see later on in the novel, there's a couple of people from like a white supremacist magazine that believe conspiracies about Jews that Campbell invented out of whole cloth just so that he could transmit these hidden messages to the Allies, and it's just hammered home even more so that just he was effective. Like it worked. And his father-in-law, he's in that same scene, Jensen, if I recall, he says that it was something to the effect of like you basically helped me justify my own Nazism in a way. Like you gave me the language to I think he says to make me feel that Germany hadn't lost her way or something like that. I think that was the line. And which is, the role of propaganda in a lot of cases is to, instill that in the population so that they continue going along with whatever political project it might be. So yeah, no, I think that's a great point. Like, he has, it's not even morally ambiguous that what he's doing is evil, technically. but he's also doing good at the same time. And the amount of good is something that Vonnegut doesn't really tell us until pretty much the last couple of pages, where he gives us a little bit of an indication, but we're meant to kind of wrestle with that idea without being able to do like the utilitarian calculus of literally measuring the units of good and units of evil against one another to see where they come out, you know? So I think it's effectively written in that way too.
That's the question I want to pose to one of you. It's like, it's kind of what I was saying. Like, if your good deeds are secret and your evil ones are essentially public, like, which one defines you?
Well, I think that's gonna get into some metaphysics, I think. But it's interesting that you use that line too, because I have it in my notes that I think it says something to the effect that Campbell's like great sin was that he served evil too openly and good too secretly, the crime of his times. Which is pretty much just exactly how you just posed that question, which is a really good one. Is like, I think where it kind of redounds to is like, what do you believe about people? Do you believe people have souls? Like, do we have, you know, some moral? Do we have like moral worth outside of just whatever we can concoct rationally? Like, you know, is there a system of karma like a lot of people believe? Like, what is the moral metaphysics at play here that like gives weight to these actions other than just straight utilitarianism, which I feel like to me is kind of at the heart of this novel, is because for those of us that may have heard that term and don't quite know how to think about it, I'll give a very simplified explanation of how I'm using that term, and this isn't meant to be like a full treatise on what utilitarian is as a philosophical concept, but just in the way that I'm using it here is like kind of the idea in ethics that you can determine the moral value of an action based on how much, well, a lot of people will phrase it, how much pleasure or pain an action creates. Now, it gets a little relative there to a certain extent, but that's kind of contrasted by deontological ethics, or, you know, what are like duty-based ethics that suggest that we have like a duty to behave a certain way based on maybe a philosophical framework that we've given ourselves. Like Kant, for instance, came up with like basically a reformulation of the golden rule. You know, we all know the golden rule: do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. He kind of reframes that as never act in a way that you wouldn't want to be the universal standard. So you should always behave like you wish other people would behave in the same circumstances. And that style of ethics, or that, you know, that school of ethics might place a little bit more value on the intent behind an action and the maxim, or like the foundational belief behind an action that allows, you know, the justification of the action instead of just the outcome. And so I'm thinking about these sorts of things, like trying to how do you think about it in ethical terms in that way? Because under maybe like a purely utilitarian ethic, if you could determine how much good Campbell produced, like, you know, if and Vonnegut was smart enough not to make this explicit because he wants us to like really think about this, is if you could prove, for instance, that Campbell won the war for the Allies and he saved, let's say, you know, 25 million Allies and Americans. If you could say that, then you can weigh, you know, then what you have to do is you have to weigh the Holocaust against that and go, you know, is this better than, did that create more good than evil in that case? And I mean, that's almost, this is why, like, for me, like, the utilitarian stuff, like, starts to break down a little bit, because it's almost impossible to compare the good of one thing against like such a historical evil as like the Holocaust, which is like it's almost so evil that it's become the word that we use to describe evil, you know?
Right.
Like it, like Adolf Hitler has literally just his name just means evil now. Like it's
Right.
shorthand because that was such a historically evil, you know, action. So, I mean, it's almost impossible to really quantify in those conditions. So, and I mean, this is, and Campbell's having this internal struggle the entire time, which leads us to the end of the novel eventually, but we'll get
Right.
there in a second. But I don't know. I know I just kind of rambled and waxed a little poetic there, but what do you think, Jensen?
I'm curious. So listening to you give us that philosophy lesson made me think what things are permissible for a person that wants to be good whenever they're combating evil. So like because he was doing in the service of good, are his evil actions justified? And also like would his goodness permitted him, because he was really close with Goebbels and even Adolf Hitler in the story,
Right.
really appreciated him and really liked him. And so like could he not have poisoned their drink or stabbed them in the back literally?
Yeah, pulled a Dietrich Bonhoeffer and tried to, yeah. Totally.
Yeah. Or does his morality prevent him from taking those direct actions? Or, I don't know. It just got me thinking about that. Like, how much grace do you have to do things that alone would seem evil in the service of good whenever you're combating?
Well, I think a really good example of this that's like a little bit easier to play around with because the stakes are a lot lower than, allowing the Nazis to take over the world potentially,
Yeah.
is like, I thought about this a lot. Like undercover cops do this all, like they'll embed with like the Hell's Angels or something. And, you have to do a little bit of blow in the bathroom with like a couple of the guys, and like you have to ingratiate yourself to this organization in order to kind of prove your bona fides so that you can eventually get information on them and ruin their drug trafficking ring or whatever it is that you're trying to do. And in all of those cases, like you're always, and perhaps a lot of this stuff is fictional. Maybe this isn't how they behave in real life. I don't know. I mean, I feel like I've seen some interviews with some guys that have talked about this kind of stuff, but who knows? But, you have to, you might have to rough up a couple guys of an opposing gang, and you're going to do some illegal drugs. And I heard about one guy that had to like hook up with a prostitute because the guys, were basically passing women around, and you had to kind of prove that you were one of the, you were a real one and all this kind of stuff. And in all of those cases, you're behaving illegally, at least. You could say unethically or immorally too, if you want, in a lot of those cases, but certainly illegally. And we do have a certain amount of understanding for, like, we can almost like compartmentalize the behavior of people that are pretending to be other people sometimes, can't we? Like as a culture, we have a space for that in our cultural consciousness that, I think that there would be plenty of people, and many of them, ethics professors that would argue otherwise, that like there's never a reason, if you're a Kantian especially, that Kant goes so far as to say that like you can never tell a lie ever. You couldn't really even tell a lie to protect someone else. You would have to think of like some other way of, circumventing that rather than lie. Because if you believe that people should never lie, then you can't either, right? If you're the strictest Kantian ever, right? So all I'm saying is I think that we do have there is a cultural, within our cultural consciousness, we do have a space for when people are, determining to do something very good. Sometimes they have to pretend to be bad people in order to facilitate that good. But the stakes get a lot higher when you're talking about the situation in this particular book,
Yeah.
I think it's important to point out too that Campbell, he may be like the facilitator of some of these ideas, but he's not the one taking the direct action necessarily. So there's another layer of, and I think this is intentional, that Vonnegut writes it with him having a layer of like separation from the actual evil being carried out. What he's really doing is he's giving people the language to justify their evil.
He's the catalyst.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. And so I mean it's difficult because I mean even in the US, for instance, like we have really strict rules about like incitement because of, the First Amendment. Like we're kind of able to say almost anything short of go to this geographical location and commit this crime, please. Like that, you have to get very specific to get into incitement territory. And that's why like, political rhetoric is often, kind of fiery here, as we can kind of separate a little bit from the actions of people that take us too seriously sometimes. And so that kind of gives it another angle too, because, an American writer like Vonnegut would be probably pretty interested in like where the line of like what actually determines like inciting something like, race hatred, like Campbell was definitely doing. Like, it's evidenced by the fact that multiple people in the book, tell him that the stuff that he said over the airwaves, like, gave them their ideas and justified their hatred and helped them carry out the things that they carried out, and so on and so forth. So anyway, that was another rant, but
No, I think it's super interesting that you bring up kind of a little bit of the parallel to today, right? Because like I was thinking about what Campbell's story would look like in today's world of, misinformation, online personas. And, one thing that I was kind of trying to build in my head, if you thought about telling this story in a more modern context, Howard Campbell in this book, he was giving these long radio broadcasts and, telling this narrative, in front of all these folks. A lot of folks today, I feel like they, get kind of like latched onto personas, and oftentimes those broadcasts per se are 60 seconds or less. And so it's like you're getting more and more, the attention span and the way people are kind of even ingesting information. Sometimes you only get a little bit of the story and that's enough to influence you. So I guess the question I'm kind of asking both of you is, what would Campbell's story look like in today's world?
Well, I think that's a really great question, because we have such a different context nowadays too, because the personas that people inhabit online are difficult to even explain as real personas. Like in most cases, like especially within online communities, is like they're so layered and steeped in irony half the time and nihilism that like you can hardly work out like what's sincere and what's not, and I think that also gives people a little bit of a permission structure to pretend they're saying things in irony that they actually believe often, or like a lot, like for instance, like a benign example is, or it's not particularly benign, but what people will say, you've probably seen some semblance of this meme before, is like, we should go burn down the police station in Minecraft. Have you seen that meme before?
That
It,
tagging, yeah,
the joke being that, like, if you say in Minecraft, then it means that it's we're just being ironic, and also you can't pin this on us as being incitement, right? Because we're just joking, right? But there's often a layer of hidden sincerity buried in that sort of ironic detachment. And what we definitely know about Campbell and the people that were listening to him is Campbell almost was more of that persona than he was a sincere, anti-Semitic propagandist like he was pretending to be. Now, he wasn't so much like acting in like detached, ironic nihilism, but he was trying to be as kind of extreme as possible because it ensured that more people, tuned into the broadcast and he could broadcast these messages that he needed to get out there. And like him being extreme meant that he got to stay on the airwaves. Nobody would ever suspect the most extreme Nazi out there of being a spy, right? Like
right.
that would be insane. So there, it almost is an analogy to it to modern day, like you brought up in a way. I feel like now, he would, I'm trying to think of like what his, now one could imagine him on TikTok just like spreading conspiracy theories and secretly, if you listen to it backwards, it, tells you the coordinates of like a U-boat or something.
Yeah. Well, there's the other angle to it of like, if you found, let's say, a personality who was feeding these conspiracies, theories, and you listen to them, the nature of our technology today means that you're likely to continue to get more of those. Like the algorithm will curate, content that you would see over and over and over again, which could potentially hammer into your psyche and everyday kind of consumption of content, a message that could be potentially, morally very damaging.
No question. I mean, the Nazis. I mean, if you just read about Goebbels, like about his propaganda efforts, like in real life, not in the novel, and in history books. Like TikTok is like would be like Goebbels' dream scenario. Like the being able to use a platform that will continue to push the same kind of content like you just mentioned that gets a lot of engagement or whatever, like it's terrifying in a way, like how much easier it is to proliferate not just conspiracy theories but just bad information. Like I was just talking to a friend the other night, and this is relevant. It's going to sound like a rabbit trail at first, but I think it's relevant. I'm sure you guys have seen this because you guys all kind of work, adjacent to the tech world in a way, or, stay around it. But like the new Sora video technology, the
OpenAI video generation.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
It's terrifyingly accurate at this point. Like it's almost indistinguishable from reality to me. I'm not very technologically savvy in a lot of ways, and so one could imagine a situation in which somebody could just generate, I don't know, the president saying ICBM missiles have been launched towards New York City. Pray to your God and head for the bunkers. And you could cause mass panic because there's no way to differentiate that from reality. And there's no good way to stop the information from proliferating either. It's just kind of this, I find that interesting in light of, kind of part of the thrust of this novel, like the idea of propaganda being used to justify, these belief systems or what have you, and
right.
Atrocities in this case, is like we're entering a world that like the propagandists of old would never have been able to dream up. Like they would have no conception of the power of this kind of stuff now. Like, I mean, for instance, like just to hammer the point home, you know, back in the day, at the time, you know, in World War II, if you wanted to transmit information that was like potentially devastating to your enemy, you know, you would either have to do there was like pirate radio stations essentially trying to like get airwaves into you know, like Germany or something, like they, or you would have to drop leaflets, you know, from airplanes of like, you know, your government is failing you, or, you know, whatever sort of, you know, disillusionment campaigns one might attempt during wartime, right? Nowadays, you could just use AI to show your country that, you know, the opposing country's president surrendering, you know, and like there would be no good way to determine whether or not it was real. And you can,
Right.
you know, it's just, I don't know. I'm sorry, I feel a little ranty tonight, more so than is normal, but I thought that was somewhat relevant.
I don't know. I think the methods or the means have changed, but that's really about it. I mean, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And there's actually even evidence of this that in the book where Howard translates the Gettysburg Address for Goebbels, and Goebbels says, "This is a very fine piece of propaganda. We are never as modern, as far ahead of the past as we think we are." And I mean, the more like I read literature, and like especially like really good stuff like Vonnegut or Dostoevsky or whatever, the more like I actually kind of agree with that last part. I mean, not Goebbels himself. Like he didn't actually even say this. This was Vonnegut.
I was gonna say,
but like we're not so modern as we think we are. We are the same animals that we've been for several thousand years.
perhaps longer. I don't know.
Yeah, well, several thousand includes hundreds of thousands. I just I don't remember where the line is, but
It seems to be getting pushed back every so often anyway. So
yeah, every time they make a new discovery, yeah. But yeah, so like I mean, at least back to 1945 or to 1776 or 1865. Yeah, at least 1,000 years. We are not different at all. The methods or means have changed, but the core thing is still the exact same.
yeah, no, you're definitely right about that. I mean, the software has not been updated.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah. Mm.
I do. I kind of wanted to drill. Sorry, I wanted to drill down on that a little bit more. The Gettysburg Address part, like it just struck me. Like, of course, Goebbels thinks that's propaganda. Like, he doesn't understand. Like, people like that can't understand sincerity. Like, they can't imagine that like a leader would ever be sincere. Like, he could only view things through the prism of manipulation in a way, because that was his whole thing. Now, obviously, this is a fictional quote, and that's not something he said. But I think that was like just kind of a funny jab towards that type of mindset
persona.
He can't possibly understand that like Lincoln would have actually have been sincere in the Gettysburg Address. He must have been just trying to manipulate people, right?
Yeah, it's a deep layer of wit right there. Classic Vonnegut.
This is one of the reasons why I love Vonnegut and why I always tell people to read him, because he will communicate a profound idea while being a ham. And just like funny, like whenever Howard's in New York, and those white supremacists find his wife, which ends up actually being his sister-in-law, and one of the guy's name is Crap Tower, or the Black Fuhrer of Harlem, who supported Japan during World War II.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. just the zaniness of everything. Even it felt like whenever Rezi tells him after like they have a night of passion together, "Hey, I'm not actually your wife Helga. I'm her little sister Rezi." Um, it always felt to me like Howard just like almost instantly accepts it and is like, "All right, well, I guess I'll just roll with it."
Yeah.
Yeah.
He kind of does in a way. Like he's
Yeah.
already, and I think that might be further underlying the point or underlining the point that Vonnegut's trying to make is, not only is Rezi pretending to be her sister, but she's also pretending not to be a spy.
Yeah.
Like that's
Mhm.
a whole
Mhm.
other layer. She's a Soviet spy. But since we are who we pretend to be, Campbell can just go, yeah, well, who cares? Like,
Yeah.
I can just keep thinking of you as my wife in a way, and
Yeah.
if you just keep acting like that, whatever. Like that's
Yeah.
almost how it felt to me. It was like, yeah, I think we can keep this charade up,
Right.
or
Right.
something like it.
A total acceptance. Yeah.
Yeah,
Just the bringing back of the nation of two.
right.
Man,
Hmm.
I loved Howard waxing poetic about the nation of two. I just found it to be romantic in a way, and it it made me think like, this guy has just like unconditional love for his wife. It's uncritical love is one of the things he says, and it just had me thinking like, if Howard can come home after a long day of Nazi propagandizing and love his wife like that, like what excuse do I have to come home and be a dick after like doing data science?
I think I'm just gonna leave that one there, Judson. I'm not
I'm
gonna
gonna let
try.
that one
Yeah.
let that one hang.
Yeah. um Not to pivot away, although possibly that is exactly what I'm trying to do. But I did want to go back to what I think we've talked about kind of in the prologue about why we love Vonnegut. But also, this is the first one we're reading as this group. Do you think that, the humor makes the horror like easier to handle, or is it more disturbing? Because there are times where um, you know, I'm laughing when I'm reading his books, but it's this kind of cold chill where, you know, you realize like these sort of almost tongue in cheek moments or these sort of things that he highlights, this humor can live so carefully and so well amongst the horror. And I think that reality can be a little hard to stomach sometimes, is how close and just how tied in this reality can be. And like just the way that he writes and where you're feeling all these multiple feelings all in one, I think it can be really powerful. And it's a hard thing to kind of get through sometimes when I'm reading it, despite me just loving his writing style and everything. So let me pose that question again. Like, do you think the humor makes it the horror easier or more disturbing?
I That's a really good question. I hadn't really thought about it in that way because I would typically think that humor is disarming in a way. But now that you pose the question like that, I think it makes it worse. And I'll tell you why is number one, real life is that way. There's always something like I think that I've heard people say that comedy is just tragedy plus time. Like
Mhm.
there's always a little tragic something in humor anyway a lot of the time because it like humor a lot of the and not to just explain what jokes are to people but like it's oftentimes the incongruity of something is what makes it funny, these juxtapositions of things that don't quite belong in the same context. That's kind of funny to us. And it's also humor is it is innately like human. And so what it does in these moments, like even when you see like the Nazi high command cracking jokes here and there or behaving in ways that are kind of funny, like one of my favorite moments, I think it was with Goebbels later. No, who was it, Jensen, that was in the Israeli prison later and all he wants to ask Campbell about is how to get a literary agent?
I think that was
Oh
Adolf
yeah.
Eichmann. That was
Oh,
Eichmann.
Eichmann. Yeah,
Yeah.
Adolf Eichmann. That's such a funny, like, just, this is a really funny scene. But, like, I think what he's doing with that humor in a lot of cases is reminding us something really important, that all of these just, like, monumentally evil people of history are humans. And that might be the part that is, like, the most incongruent and uncomfortable for a lot of us, is, like, you're, like, a few missed meals away from doing things that you would never expect of yourself. Like, we're so, and Jensen kind of already hinted at this, that, like, we're never that far away from repeating history in a lot of ways. And it's because, like we were talking about, like, our software fundamentally is the same as it's always been. And, like, we're always right on the knife's edge of behaving in ways that we would find monstrous under the right circumstances in the right situations. And, like, I think that is something that's really uncomfortable to confront, that, like, if you had been born in another place at another time, and the only opportunity that you ever had was being schooled in a very particular set of values and beliefs, like, you could be a Nazi too. There's nothing really setting you apart from that, other than just the happenstance of history and good fortune in a lot of ways.
You don't even have to go that far, though. Like, you're not that special.
Yeah,
And it really
maybe
goes
that's
both
what I'm
ways.
saying.
Yeah, it really goes both ways, because there's also the other side of the coin where, like, you'll hear the person, especially, like, we are all, like, born and raised in the South. You hear people that you are in your college English lit class saying, "Oh, if I was born in the 1840s, I would have been an abolitionist." And it's like, we would all like to believe
Maybe.
that,
Yeah,
but
you
I
might
don't
have been.
think you would be a product of your time and your culture, and you would be just as up. Sorry, Will, you know you have to bleep that one, but you would be just as up as everyone else of that time, and you're not special.
Mother Night came before Slaughterhouse-Five,
Yeah, it was like,
right?
it was his third book, and I think Slaughterhouse-Five was his sixth book. It
Yeah.
was, like, almost a I think Slaughterhouse-Five came out in 1969 or something, and this was 61-ish.
Mhm.
Let me see. Yeah, 61. Yep. Yeah, so it's like 8 years before.
It just feels so much more bleak to me. Like, I don't know, in comparison. Not to say Slaughterhouse-Five isn't bleak, but I don't know. There's just a very clear darkness throughout this book. Despite what we were talking about, there being plenty of the gallows humor, that kind of undercuts that despair a little bit. But still, really, when I think about those two books in comparison, this one just feels a lot
Yeah.
heavier.
Part of me wonders too if that's not, like, part of his motivation for the title of the book. Mother Night being, like I said in the intro, like, how the demon Mephistopheles refers to what the universe was like before God created light, just this infinite void of nothing. It kind of does make you feel that way, and the despair of Campbell as his story unfolds kind of returns to that void as well. Because I was kind of trying to think of, like, why the novel is titled what is titled. Like, what is he trying to tell us with the title? So I don't know. Does anybody else have an analysis on that?
I honestly have never thought about it. Like, I always felt like all of his books, like, have, like, weird names that are, like, these, like, cheeky references to something in the book, but, like, never really thought too deeply about them. Whereas, like, other books, it's like the title of the book tells you what the book is,
Right.
which I guess is the
It
same
can almost
thing
be
as what
like
I
a
just said.
thesis statement in a way, sometimes,
Yeah,
depending on the book. Yeah.
yeah. Like, the Brothers Karamazov is about the brothers and the Karamazov family.
Right. Yeah, right. Crime and Punishment is about both crime and punishment. But I mean, that was an interesting segue that I did there on accident. But in true Crime and Punishment reference, regardless of what we think about the ethical value of Campbell's double agent life, he feels a type of way about it for sure. And this is part of the towards the end of the novel as he's struggling with what he's done in his life. And I think that having come into contact with the racist dentist that believes in like dental eugenics, which was an idea that I think he mentioned that Campbell invented for his radio show, and this guy believes wholeheartedly. And interacting with some of the other people that he inspired in one way or another, I think kind of drew him even further down into the despair. And he eventually just feels that like he needs to be punished in some way. Like it is of moral importance, some cosmic moral universe. For some reason, he must be punished. Which is really interesting because I think that gives us like at least some insight into Campbell's metaphysics. He knows, regardless of the good that he knows he did, he can't live with the evil that he did.
Right.
How does that strike y'all?
It just makes me think of Crime and Punishment.
Sure.
To an extent, with Raskolnikov in the same way, like couldn't live under the weight of what he had done, and Campbell is the same way. What strikes me, like if I'm juxtaposing those two novels, and I know that in this club, the book club, we haven't read Crime and Punishment yet, but it seems that in Crime and Punishment, there's like a weight that's lifted by confessing and receiving your punishment. But here, Campbell, he's able to turn himself in and go and stand trial. But even one of the guards says to him, "You're not like the other prisoners here. They all sleep peacefully, and you toss and turn and mumble in your sleep."
Right. And I love that line because it kind of gets back to what I mentioned a little bit or hinted at a little bit earlier too, is another one of the more terrifying things about a lot of these people that committed war crimes in World War II specifically is they don't think they did anything wrong. A lot of these people. You can read transcripts still of like the trials of like Adolf Eichmann and some of these other people. I'm pretty sure I've like read excerpts of them over the years, and like a lot of these people, they more or less felt that they were behaving out of some sort of a righteous cause. And that's just a really interesting and subtle way for Vonnegut to kind of underscore that point as well, that like Campbell is the only one here that thinks he did anything wrong, which, very well may have been true.
Yeah,
I think he's just like
the only one, but he definitely did something wrong. But he's
the only one that thinks he did.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know where I was going with that, so go ahead, Will.
No, it's like he's not even asking necessarily for forgiveness. He's just like asking to be understood, to a degree.
It seems to me it's more so that he wants to be punished. Like,
yeah.
He feels that like the evil that he committed is worthy of punishment, and this is why. I mean, here's where the big spoiler alert tag goes. Is he's on trial in Israel for war crimes. He's a double agent. He knows it, but there's no proof. His own government can't necessarily come out and claim him because that would undermine all of the other espionage they've got going on, or, you know, give up sources, or who knows. It's never really quite exactly explained why the I guess it wouldn't have been the CIA, then it would have been what was the precursor to the CIA? It doesn't matter. Um, but at the last minute during this trial, a letter comes in the mail for him, and well, several do. I think two of them one was a scam, which is hilarious. One was an advertisement, I'm pretty sure. Mm-hmm. And then the third was from his handler during the war, his blue fairy godmother, as he calls him. And in this letter, his handler lays out exactly what happened. I recruited him here. He did this. He was one of the most effective, spies that the Allies ever had. He basically won the war for us. He sings his praises, and he goes on to say too that, like, I'm basically like ruining my career and potentially going to go to jail for even coming out and saying this kind of stuff. Like, it was forbidden of him, and he gives his real name and address and all this kind of stuff. And so Campbell gets off. Like, the Israelis are like, okay, yeah, you were working for the Allies, so you're free to go. And he can't live with that. He knows he needs to be punished. And so what does he do? He kills himself. Or it implies very heavily that he's going to hang himself. And it never, he just says, "Auf Wiedersehen" at the end of the novel, and that's that. And he thinks that he needs to hang for his crimes, but that's important. He isn't looking for, like, absolution. He's not looking for people to believe his story. He needs to be punished. And that's how it ends. That's how the novel ends, is with him. If nobody else will do it, then I'll do it myself, essentially.
Well, question, does he... I got the impression that he did want people to know that he was a spy for the Allies, but still also be punished.
I think that's fair to say. I think that he wanted the story to be told, but I also think that he wasn't looking to tell the story in order to absolve himself of his sins.
There was no redemption.
He's not looking for redemption. That he was looking to be punished,
Yeah. What's that thing, like, it felt to me like he was just like, I am ready to die for my crimes, but I want you to know who I really was and what I did in secret.
Yes.
Which I don't know. I think it's...
I'm reading that last paragraph now. He says, "So I'm about to be a free man again, to wander where I please. I find that prospect nauseating. I think that tonight is the night I will hang Howard W. Campbell Jr. for his crimes against himself." Not his crimes against humanity necessarily, but this is what I started to get at, was in the kind of deontological perspective. He knew he had a set of principles that he violated, and so he's sinned against himself, not so much the moral order. Because you could easily make the argument that in these extreme circumstances, he had to do what he had to do to make sure that the war ended and the Allies won. So maybe he was justified in that context, but in his own philosophical framework, he's violated all of his own maxims, and therefore his crimes against himself have to be punished. I think that's like the important line there. I'm glad I reread that because I kind of forgot about that.
So he's basically trying, he can't, he's like struggling to come to terms with the fact that he pretended for so long to be something that he wasn't, and never really came back to who he thought he was, essentially.
I don't know so much if it's that, or just that, like, within the role that he was playing, he said things that he didn't believe in order to further a propaganda effort of a murderous totalitarian regime that, went on to commit the Holocaust and, all other atrocities all over across Europe. And I think that's more so the issue. Is it's not that he couldn't come back to himself because he had been so embedded in the role. I think it was more that just like what he did while playing that role, he couldn't live with that. That was the crime. It was the literal crimes.
So does he think he is a good person? I guess is the question.
No, I don't. I don't think so. I think that that's why he felt that he needed to be punished for his crimes, is because he feels that what he did wasn't good,
Mhm.
at least against himself. And I mean, there is that kind of bifurcation there between, like Jensen mentioned, he wanted people to know he was a spy to an extent because I think he wanted the world to know the true story of him, and like that maybe what he did was good, but for himself it wasn't enough. So there's the two sides of the coin of like, I violated all of my principles, but what I did may be seen in the thrust of history as having been good. Instead of, I think part of him couldn't live with the thought that he would go down in history as a Nazi, because he knew he wasn't, but he pretended to be one, and that was enough for himself to feel that he had violated.
Didn't his parents die before, die never knowing what he really was? They died thinking he was a Nazi.
I'm pretty sure you're right about that.
Yeah, which I don't know. I feel like that would be like your family, like dying believing that you were a Nazi, would be heartbreaking, and like not asking for absolution, but just you want people to know.
Yeah, that's kind of what it seems like to me, at least.
Yeah,
I mean, I could be off base on that, but that was my general impression.
yeah, it's heartbreaking.
No, I mean, it really is. I mean, I think this is kind of where the opening line that Vonnegut writes about being careful about what you pretend to be, and it's not just because how you portray yourself to other people is how they perceive you. Like, that's obviously true. And if you dress up like a cowboy, everyone's going to assume you're a cowboy, right? You have on the costume in a similar fashion, like what that's how you're going to be perceived, is how you present yourself. But there's the added layer that like, what does pretending to be something do to you, to like your authentic self? Like, is there an authentic self? Like, that's a whole other can of worms. But like, Campbell seemed to think that there was, and maybe Vonnegut did too, is that something that he had been portraying was a violation of that authentic self, and that was the crime.
Like morality is not allegiance, it's authenticity, essentially.
Yeah,
To a
and
degree.
maybe so, maybe. There's a lot of ways that you could read it. Like
Right.
you could put a kind of a classic, more like religious spin on it, and say that you've violated your soul. You've defied God's moral order. The moral framework of the universe. Like, maybe there's an intrinsic moral property to the universe, that sort of thing. You could take it in that direction too. I don't know what Vonnegut exactly what he was trying to say with like where our morality comes from, but he seems to think at least it's somewhat individualistic. And at least for Campbell, something in the way that he behaved was enough to have been considered a violation of whatever that moral framework was. And I think all of us kind of intuitively understand what that means. It's just difficult to kind of put all of that into words because we're so steeped in our own kind of cultural milieu of like where we get our moral center from, you know. So you don't often deconstruct it in that way and try to figure out exactly where it's all coming from, but maybe we take it for granted a little bit.
Well, man, this feels as good as any to, I think, wrap this one up. This is a tough one. And again, another great one to read about. I'm so stoked that we read this one first. And honestly, like, we could just have a whole season of Vonnegut and I would be totally happy. But there's still so many great books that I'm excited we're gonna dive into. So
I hope you guys enjoyed the book. Thanks for reading along with us.
What would everybody grade it?
Oh,
sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you. I know you were doing your sign off, but I just had the thought that Vonnegut gave this an A. What would y'all grade the book?
I mean, at least an A. I mean, it's really, really good. I can't really think of a lot of things about it that I would take any points off. Yeah, I mean, A plus, for sure.
yeah, I won't fight that. I mean, it's a great piece of literature. You could do 4 more discussions about this and unpack different things.
Well, again, thank you guys for listening along and reading along with us, and we'll see you guys again in a couple of weeks to discuss The Stranger by Albert Camus. Check 1 2, check. Hey everybody, this is Taylor. We had a couple of technical difficulties in that last episode, so I'm just going to put this in here at the end to keep you guys up to date on what we're going to be doing next. So if you're going to follow along with the book club with us, the next book that we're going to read is The Stranger by Albert Camus. I can't bring myself to say Albert and try to pronounce it as accurately as possible. I just feel silly doing so. So I will just say Albert Camus from now on. The Stranger is a great classic in the existentialist literary movement. Written in Paris, Camus was an Algerian French writer. He considered himself an artist and not a philosopher, but a lot of people kind of read him as a philosopher. He's got a lot of really interesting things to say. For this next discussion episode, which will be in 2 weeks, we will be reading part 1 of The Stranger, which in my edition extends to page, it's about 60-something pages. It's not a particularly long book. It's roughly about the same size as Mother Night, but I just feel like it's going to take us 2 episodes to fully kind of discuss what's going on in this book. So I hope you guys will pick up a copy of The Stranger and join us in reading it. And I hope you enjoyed the Mother Night discussion. And we'll see you next time. Thanks.